ago, you would have seen the Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan explaining that the former Eskom CEO André Ruyter did allude to certain people being involved in corruption. But Gordhan also saying he doesn't have a duty to go to the police, but that Ruyter does, because Ruyter is the person with the evidence. There's also been reporting from both City Press and Daily Maverick in the last 36 hours that 2 cabinet ministers are involved in the corruption at Eskom. As you know, the ANC wants to go to court to force Ruyter to reveal what he knows. Dr. Jakkie Cilliers is the head of African Futures and Innovation at the Institute for Security Studies. Dr. Cilliers, good afternoon to you. There's so many different elements to this, but I think we must start with the Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan's statement that Ruyter must reveal what he knows. How do you see what's happening here? How much oversight would a minister have of all of this?
Afternoon, Stephen. Well, if you watch the Ike Larsen TV interview, it seems like Ruyter tried exactly to do that on a number of occasions, but that none of the security agencies seemed to be particularly interested, and that he was frustrated at every effort. Neither the State Security Agency, the police, it seems there's a bit of interest from the NPA, and this is really quite astounding. You have, by all apparent indications from that interview, consistent efforts to inform and try and get the cooperation of the rest of the state, but it seems like it was a bit of a lone fight. And one of his major protagonists is exactly Gordhan, who is now scrambling back to try and cover himself like most politicians do. So it's an unenviable situation and quite disgraceful in a certain way.
A few moments ago, we were speaking to the political analyst Levi Endow, and he suggested that both Ruyter and Pravin Gordhan had a duty to go to the police. I mean, would a minister have a duty to go to the police as well? I mean, I don't think they would have the detailed information that a CEO would. On the other hand, if you know about corruption and you're supposed to report it, how far does it go?
Well, for me, that's a bit of a technical issue, and one can argue it's the same argument that we had around Palapala, Ramaphosa reporting it to his head of protection services, which is a member of the police, and in his view, he had made that report. I think what is much, much more concerning is the depth of corruption and the lack of collaboration and support that the head of Eskom, the major public utility that is at the center of the power challenges that we face, received from the rest of government. And particularly within the security establishment, the lack of urgency and engagement on this issue, and then what seems to be ongoing obstruction by Gordhan. So you have the appointment of a CEO, and then basically you make it almost impossible for that CEO to do his job. I think that's much more important than who reports what to the police.
There seem to be a number of issues now, and so many different elements to this. I mean, I think race is somehow a part of this too.
Yes,
their claims of corruption, there's the ANC's response. How do you think voters are going to react to all of this? You do some scenario planning, you look ahead. How do you think voters are seeing all of this? Because race is definitely a part of it.
Stephen, I've long held, as you know, I wrote a book about this, that come 2024, the ANC will go below 50%. The big question is how far. If it goes to, until about a few months ago, I was thinking about 47%. It could go, let's say, to 44%, because we must remember that the rural areas remain under, you and I operate in a certain way, in a bit of a bubble, you less than I, and the outrage that there is within our bubble around what's happening is, of course, not reflected in rural areas where ANC support remains relatively strong. So maybe the ANC will definitely go below 50%. They will lose Gauteng, but again, by how far? Does this allow a growth coalition to come to power, or does it make the EFF the kingmaker? They will probably also in 2024 lose a majority in KwaZulu-Natal. They may lose majority in Northern Cape. But except for Gauteng, in all those 3 provinces, it is quite possible for the ANC, in partnership with the EFF, for example, which seems to be their natural partner, to put together a governing coalition. And that, of course, is not good news for South Africa. The RAT faction, I would argue, and the EFF probably make good bedmates. But for South Africa, for a growth alliance, we really need to to move beyond the ANC. If we look at the extent of corruption, patronage, mismanagement, incompetence within the ANC, the party has no idea. It does not believe in evidence. And this is probably the thing that frustrates us in the think tank world the most. The ANC believes in ideology. It does not seem possible to move that. So we need to move towards a system where we can clean out the cadre deployment, reset some policies, open up South Africa for private investment, turn to the private sector. There is nobody else that can help to turn the growth trajectory of the country around. I doubt if that can happen in 2024. I've always held that will happen in 2029. But in the meanwhile, the damage that is being inflicted in South Africa is huge.
I mean, there's strong views about what's going to happen. There's a whole sort of series of things around this. Now, the ANC itself has said that load shedding hurts the ANC in elections. So now we have load shedding and what's likely to be more load shedding, quite a lot of load shedding, in fact, ahead of next year's elections. We've got, frankly, we don't know who's going to take over at Eskom as a CEO. I don't know if anyone will take that job now. Bloomberg described it as the worst job in world energy. I think many people would agree with that sentiment. We also have the issue of corruption, which has hurt the ANC in the past. We've seen what corruption can do to the ANC's image. So now these two things together, load shedding on the one side, corruption on the other, which may be linked to the load shedding. I mean, how big an impact does that have with voters? Is it possible to even know?
None of us really know. And as I say, there is, in my view, a huge difference between urban and rural areas. And the main challenge that parties face is the inability to mobilize the urban black vote. And this is what everybody's fighting about. The DA at one point seemed to be positioned to do that. Then, quite frankly, with the election of John Steenhuisen, that seems to have taken a step back. So, is Mmusi Maimane or any of the others, Action SA, going to be able to excite the black vote, the urban black vote, to the extent that it can significantly bring in the stay-away vote? Because it's not, it's the stay-away vote in urban areas that I think really is the swing factor in all of this, and that's the big question.
There seem to be other things relating to this. I mean, it seems to me fairly likely that probably in the next few days somehow, there's so much pressure on the story, the identities of the two ministers who are implicated are going to come up, whether they come from Ruyter, whether they come from someone else. And then some people in the ANC may want to defend those people, and some may want to oppose them. So then could we have more division in the ANC? I mean, for some, the echoes of sort of the state capture era, those that supported then President Jacob Zuma, those that opposed him, suddenly it all comes back in a way.
Well, you know, is it possible to think of an ANC that is more divided than it is at the moment? It just seems to be all over the place. And I generally think, just to return to an earlier remark, that we overestimate corruption within the ANC and underestimate incompetence. Very often, many of the large contracts that we've seen, the mismanagement and the mismanagement literally of every sector of particularly state-owned enterprises, has often been because it's driven by ideology, a lack of belief in evidence, and by just simply incompetence. So I think that those factors all play into where we are headed. The ANC is going to get hurt by all of this, but is there an alternative? Is there an urban alternative that can mobilize in Gauteng, that can mobilize in KwaZulu-Natal, in the Northern Cape? And those are the areas where I think the ANC is probably most vulnerable.
Jakkie, I mean, a lot of different things are going to happen now. A lot of things are going to come together in strange ways. Is it becoming more and more difficult to sort of predict what could happen? I mean, are the scenarios changing almost minute by minute?
Well, you know, the long-term structural trends don't really change, and that is the structural decline in support of the ANC, and there are factors that drive that: urbanization, education levels, and just simply poor government performance, extent of corruption, and so on. Those trends, I think what we are speaking about is to what extent can those trends be accelerated, and the main factor that we can't model really is the emergence of an alternative urban-based party that attracts the black urban stay-away vote. That could be a significant change factor. We may be seeing that with the elections of Obi in Nigeria. We saw that certainly with Ruto in Kenya. Things are happening in Africa where the old liberation era leadership are no longer as solidly in control. Okay, I'm also speaking about Southern Africa when I make that reference, because of course both Kenya and Nigeria have long moved beyond the post-liberation transition, post-colonial transition that we are seeing in South Africa. So structural trends do matter. It's a question of how rapidly they will accelerate. The ANC will lose, I think, majority in 2024. Only a huge rabbit could change that. The question is how far. If we're talking of below 40%, which I think is hugely unlikely, then you have the option of an opposition alliance governing, but I think that's only possible in 2029.
Dr. Jakkie Cilliers, thank you. Head of African Futures and Innovation at the Institute for Security Studies. Do appreciate it. Well, of course, more from that Pravin Gordhan interview, the interview with the Minister of Public Enterprises at 4 o'clock.